Even though the solstice is still another couple of weeks away, summer is arriving this week with a vengeance. As I'm filming this, in the next couple of days, we're expecting to get some high temperatures in the low hundreds. I believe on Tuesday here it's supposed to be topping out at about 106 degrees Fahrenheit. So I thought it might be prudent to do a quick video on some countermeasures, some steps that you can take ahead of a heat wave to help your garden fare well through it. So here we go. The decision to install shade cloth was one of our big gardening game changers here in the harsh heat of Sacramento. While shade cloth obviously won't reduce the ambient air temperature of a given area, it will noticeably reduce the degree to which surfaces heat up. Mulch, garden beds, leaves themselves, fruits, these can all heat to a tremendous degree if left in direct sunlight for an extended period of time, and the effect is exacerbated by air temperatures that are already in the high 90s or low hundreds. Extremely hot surface temperatures can, of course, result in plant stress, which can reduce yields, prevent fruiting, kill pollen, and it can actually physically damage the plants themselves. Not only does shade cloth take the bite out of the harsh summer sun, thereby reducing plant stress, it'll make your garden a much nicer environment for you as well. I highly recommend you get your shade cloth up before any major heat waves arrive. And after you get your shade cloth up, it's a good idea to go around and look for any major gaps or areas that aren't protected that need to be. I'm personally less concerned about gaps in the shade cloth, as long as those gaps are occurring at the eastern and western edges of my yard, where any plants receiving full sunlight will receive that full sunlight at the very beginning or at the very end of the day when the sun just isn't so intense. This strip of area, however, at the northern edge of my gardens, could be a problem. A gap in the shade cloth means that many of these tomatoes, as well as these cucumbers and some of the zucchini, are receiving unfiltered sunlight for 12 or more hours a day. This is already having a detrimental effect on many of these plants. Most noticeably, many of these developing tomato fruits here are starting to show signs of sun scald. This presents itself as a pale area on the fruit on the side that faces the sun. I didn't have any other pieces of legitimate shade cloth lying around, and I'm about to the ceiling of my garden budget for the year, so I installed this piece of burlap that I had left over from my front yard garden project. It looks a little makeshift like everything else in my garden, but it does the job, and it's really going to take the bite out of the sunlight here in a couple of days when the heat arrives. If your garden is large enough to warrant a drip irrigation system, now would be a good time to go through and check your lines and emitters for any blockages, leaks, or other malfunctions that could prove a problem should you need to switch the system on during the heat wave. I would personally hate to get into a situation where I find my gardens need water, and at the worst possible time, my drip irrigation system fails, meaning I'm going to have to spend hours in the yard with a hose on a weeknight. When my gardens need water, it's really nice to be able to just switch my system on, set a timer to remind me when it's time to turn it off, and then go watch TV or engage in some other hobby for the next 30 to 60 minutes. While this emitter is being tested above the mulch, I recommend placing emitters under the mulch for maximum water conservation. Mulch can be thought of as armor for your soil. It does a lot to prevent drying and keep the sun from cooking all the nutrients out of the top layers of soil. Prior to the arrival of a heat wave, it might not be a bad idea to check around your garden and look for any areas where the mulch is running a little thin, or like in my case, where I'd remove the mulch so that I could more easily plant some starts of basil, marigold, and parsley. It's likely the impulse is going to be to give all of your gardens a good heavy soaking before the arrival of a heat wave. This is understandable, but it may or may not be the best approach. While you never want your soil to dry out to the point that your plants begin to wilt, that's really bad plant stress, overwatering can also cause its own problems. For example, overwatering can result in tomato splitting. While I don't fully trust the assessment of this soil moisture meter here, I'm using it to demonstrate the point that sometimes there's a lot more moisture in soil than we at first expect. Before rushing to water preemptively, it's not a bad idea to make sure your soil actually needs it. And you don't need an electronic meter, really. Just try to stick your finger into your soil an inch or two, and if it feels damp, you're probably good. Conduct that test every evening after a really hot day, and if it's coming up dry, that's when you can consider turning on your drip irrigation or breaking out the hose. Keep in mind that the larger and deeper your garden beds are, whether they be above ground or in ground, the longer they're going to take to dry out. These beds here, I'm probably not going to have to water them at all during the upcoming heat wave. By contrast, all of my half wine barrel planters, as well as all of the containers on my patio, will likely have to be watered multiple times during the upcoming heat wave. If you happen to be gardening in grow bags, I wish you luck because they're probably going to dry out very fast. Before a major heat wave arrives, I always like to get out and pick anything that's ready to be picked. If you're like me, you're probably not going to want to spend a ton of time outside when temps are above 100, and it would be a shame to let any produce go past its prime because you didn't feel like being out in the heat. When it comes to tomatoes, I'll actually go through and pick anything that started to show a blush of color. Temperatures in the 90s and 100s are well above the ideal ripening temperature for tomatoes, and they'll actually ripen faster indoors. As far as flavor, well, honestly, I've never been able to tell the difference between a vine-ripened tomato and one that I let ripen inside on a shelf. Not a bad little harvest of tomatoes and peppers for so early in the season. While extreme heat is never exactly great for a garden, if you do your diligence and take some proactive steps ahead of a major heat wave, you'll get through it just fine. I know from experience that it's very possible to have a healthy, productive garden in spite of long, hot, dry summers. So, until next time, let's hope it all doesn't die.